If you are in the market for a SaltDogg spreader, watch this video first. So I've got a SaltDogg SHPE2000. This is my second year with this spreader, and I want to do a little bit of a review on how it's been and how it's going since we've bought it. And this should help you if you are in the market for one of these spreaders. Now, SaltDogg, they're not the most expensive out there. They're not the cheapest, but they're also not the most expensive. I kind of see it as a bargain brand compared to the Douglas Dynamics salt spreaders, like the Fisher stainless steel Fisher, or the Polycasters with the big chain-driven drag chains, versus the SaltDogg, which is a poly unit, which is it's got an auger. Now this is a SHPE2000, not the Pro. So there's a SHPE2000 Pro that has a little bit more power on the auger and a little bit different of a design here with their spinner, and just a little bit more heavy duty. This one is not the Pro. It's a little bit cheaper than the Pro, but I don't know if the Pro is all that much better. So pros and cons. Number one, let's start with the pros. Number one, the spreader is light. This thing weighs probably around 300 pounds. When you look at the shipping on this, though, it might say 600 pounds shipping, but I think that's because the pallet, the pallet that it comes on weighs almost as much as the spreader itself. This spreader is not very heavy, so when it comes to these pickup trucks and putting them in your pickup trucks, there's payload issues a lot of times with the 250s, the 350s, kind of sort of even still with the 450. When you're putting a 1,000-pound plow on the front, and if you've got an 800-900 pound salt spreader, now you're talking a significant amount of payload loss just because of the spreader. Now this spreader, I believe, weighs about 300 pounds. Me and another guy can lift this up and put it in the truck without any equipment. That's a huge pro. So if you're a guy and you don't have a whole bunch of heavy equipment, maybe you don't have a forklift or a bobcat or anything like that, you don't need that to put this in this truck. You don't even need to go get a bobcat, because two guys, you put one guy on the right side of it, one guy on the left side of it, and you lift up on these handles. You just grab these handles and you can pick this thing up. So if you got four guys, even better. So number one pro is it's light. You can put it in the truck by hand. I've actually put this in the truck by hand by myself with no help. I don't recommend anybody do that because it is dangerous and heavy and all that, but it could be done. At the end of the day, I've done it. So, that's a huge pro. These other spreaders, I know they're better. I know the Fisher stainless steel spreader is a better spreader than this one, but it's heavy. It's a 500-600 pound spreader. So that's number one pro in my book, is the weight. Number two pro, it's capacity. So when you look at a lot of these other spreaders, the big Western spreader only has 1.5 yards. You can get more, but you're paying a lot more. Straight up SaltDogg, 2 yards, a 2-yard capacity spreader. Straight up 2-yard capacity right here. They got smaller ones as well. They got bigger ones than this. They got 2.5. But when it comes to pure capacity dollar, your money's going a lot further with a SaltDogg, because you can get some higher capacities for less money with the SaltDogg. And at the end of the day, that's a huge factor. So you got a lighter weight spreader that can hold typically more capacity per dollar compared to some of the other spreaders, like from Boss and from Fisher and from Western, which I'll admit those spreaders are better, but they're going to come at a cost. Now, as far as the looks, I feel like the SaltDoggs, they have kind of a blocky look. This is the one that's kind of curvy, though, and it fits the modern trucks a little bit better with those curves, with the sweeps and all that, compared to their older design. It's just like a square look. So yeah, I think the looks are decent. I will say, that stainless steel stainless steel spreader with the drag chain from Fisher, from Western, they do look better than this, but I mean, it's not a huge deal. I don't like how the Tornadoes look, the Western Tornadoes. Not huge on that, with the big doors that open on top of it. I mean, I don't know if I like that, but again, I've never had one of those, so it's hard to say. What I will say about those ones is the same Like the same thing, the same size, all that would only be a 1.5 yard versus this being a 2 yard. And going to a 2 yard is so much better because when you're getting loaded with this, these guys are loading by the yard. They don't like loading 1.5 yards. It's hard for them to tell how much that is. They're measuring this salt with their bucket. And a lot of times they got a 1 yard bucket. So yeah, it's not easy for them to measure that. And if I'm going to get a yard or I'm going to get 2 yards, I don't want to be getting 1.5 yards. So, that's another plus for this. You can get either 1 yard or 2 yards versus the ones. It's no real. It's kind of annoying to have a half a yard spreader or a 1.5 yard spreader. So, get a yard spreader and get a 2 yard spreader, in my opinion. So, yeah, I mean, as far as pros, it's well built. As far as this thing's never burnt up on me. The controllers never went out. The auger still works. It's got one grease fitting on it. It still works. Now, has it ever clogged up on me? Yes. It's clogged up and the auger's been jammed. Yes. But some of that's partly my fault for leaving salt in the machine. Another pro is, in this particular machine, everything is stainless or poly. So there's no corrosion. I've left salt in it. The thing still looks new on the inside. The auger is fully stainless, even though it's not that big of an auger. It's a fully stainless steel auger. It's got a stainless steel inverted V. It's got some powder coated metal on some other components that sit up higher, up in here, and the screen's powder coated steel, but that's not a huge factor in my opinion. Everything else has been rock solid. I don't really maintain it like I should. I don't really spray it and clean it every time like they tell you. I clean it at the end of the season and that's it. You know what I mean? I clean it at the end of the season and that's it, and it still runs. I'm not going to clean the inside of a salt spreader. It's just not something I'm going to do. Now, some of the other better spreaders from like Snow X, yeah, better spreader. They have this helicoil auger, but it's a steel auger and it's gonna rust. It's a powder coated steel auger. So they got a real sweet auger, but it's not stainless. This thing is all stainless and it hasn't had any problems with corrosion or anything like that. The poly body, you can drill anything and anywhere into the outside of the body. I've never had any problems doing that. I've got my shovels mounted onto the spreader. It's kind of standing up. I got those in all 4 locations. These actually just broke, and I'm going to put 2 more new ones on there, but those are just the clips that hold the shovels up. But yeah, these are the buyer's straps, and I'm probably going to go with more of these straps as well. But you could secure shovels and stuff to the outside of this thing, no problem at all. Being poly, I mean, you don't want to go crazy and make too many holes, but it's double walled. It's not single walled, so those aren't protruding into my salt storage or anything, and it's just not a huge deal. Now for the cons. The power to this thing isn't that great. Like the amount of power in that auger, it's pretty minimum. Meaning that if that weight of that salt ever gets onto that auger's done. It's not gonna turn. So what I've done is I take my inverted V and I keep my inverted V lowered to the lowest level, just so that way there's no chance of salt getting on my auger and stopping it. I've had it kind of clog up on me and not be able to spread at the job site. If that ever happens, try just turning on the spreader and just driving or revving up the engine, because the voltage going back here is not that great sometimes, especially with a diesel, because the engine's not running that fast all the time. So I did notice that, like, if the engine speed's too low, and I've been a little bit negligent and left some salt in there for too long, then the weight of the salt can get on the spreader. Now, another issue too, though, now we're talking about weight on the auger. When you spread with this spreader, you can't use too much vibrator. You don't want to overuse the vibrator. On this particular spreader, you want to just turn on the vibrator only if it doesn't flow. And then as soon as it gets flowing, you want to turn it back off. The reason for that is because this thing only has a vibrator on one side. It does not have a dual vibrator. So when you vibrate this thing continuously, it causes it to feed on one side only. And once it feeds on one side only, so one side of the spreader will it'll spread all this salt, and then this other side won't feed any salt. It won't feed nearly as fast as the side with the vibrator. So when that happens, the inverted V that's in here in the middle gets shoved over. It gets shoved over to the side with the vibrator, and it gets all, because there's no ribbing, there's no angle iron in the rods that hold the inverted V down, and there's nothing fastening the inverted V down. So from the weight of the salt, it shoves itself over. So I don't know if I'm missing a part or I got to go in there and modify something, but my V is just flopping around in there, and I got to be real careful. Now, the other SaltDogg spreader that I have, the inverted V is just fixed to the bottom, but it's a 1 yard spreader. But the inverted V on that spreader is just fixed to the bottom. And on that one, I got to vibrate the whole time. On that one, I got to keep the vibrator going the whole time because it doesn't feed as good. So this one, it feeds okay, but you don't want to vibrate on this until I figure out why it only feeds. I mean, I know that the vibrator is going to feed the vibrating side more, but yeah, so that's what happened. I had to shovel this thing out a couple of times because I was vibrating too much and also leaving salt in it, which is definitely not recommended, but it's something that I do. But I was leaving my salt in there and vibrating it, and then that vibrator moves that salt from one side, and then the salt comes down and pushes the V over, and then all the weight gets onto the auger. The V is no longer preventing the weight from sitting on the auger, and then I got to shovel it out. So I've been able to unclog it from that situation a couple times just by revving up the engine and letting it unjam itself, because it starts to protect itself from damaging itself by turning the auger off. It's only going to try so hard to move the salt out in that situation, but eventually it quits. So that's a con. You know, the inverted V, for whatever reason, didn't come secured, or maybe something's missing, but I got to figure something out why my inverted V just kind of flops around in there. But as far as that, I mean, that might be it for cons. I know some of this stuff, like this here, these wing nuts, they always come loose down here that hold this on here. They always come loose. So on my other one, I've actually replaced these. I probably could tighten them up now that they've kind of corroded ever so slightly. But if I tighten them up and put some thread lock on them. And also these wing nuts down in here, I'm not a huge fan of these. And this door that keeps your salt, this door up in there is absolutely horrible and useless. There's a little tab you can pull on. That one's probably bent, but there's a little tab you pull on to close this door. Useless, horrible. You can't close the door. Just leave it wide open and it'll be good. Tighten these up. Done. No need to close that door. Don't even need that door there. Just leave the door open. It'd be better if they didn't even put a door there, because that is a useless door. So that pretty much stays wide open. That door is useless. But yeah, so it does give you a wire and it's fused over at the controller, but it gives you a wire that's hot at all time. This one's actually cut right here because way back there I redid it. I redid the wiring on it. I actually increased the gauge over to a 12 gauge wire, and I tied this in. I tied this into these lights here using some shrink tube and some convolute to kind of make it look original. It kind of does look original. This third one here is added by me. This one here in the middle is factory. This one's factory. So yeah, I reran inside a wire down through the whole harness, and I actually added my ground, because they only give you a power. So they give you a power wire to hook up. Great, thank you. But they only give you the power, and you got to find the ground. So for the ground, you probably could grab it. I don't know if you can get it off the spreader, but you have to grab your ground off the frame of your truck, which it's an aluminum truck, and I can't just be drilling holes. So for ground, I actually tied into my, let's see if you can see it. I tied my frame, or I tied into my, there's my ground right there. Black wire right here. There. And I have this extended running board, and I pretty much just tied into it. I tied into a bolt on the extended running board and tapped my ground wire into my harness here, and then they join up together with the hot wire as well. And this is where I cut out the original hot wire. This brown one here was the original hot wire coming out here. I cut that at this point, and I put in 2 new wires hot and brown. This is actually some extras. So this is kind of how it looks. Brown going into this new red automotive wire, 12 gauge. So I tied in some new wiring, and that goes to this light. Now I'm probably gonna move these to a different spot, but either way, I have this pigtail. I just got to type into it, and that's that, and they just hang there. But do I think it's a good buy? I think it's definitely a good purchase. Is it perfect? No. Is it the best? No, but it is an affordable option. I think if you can spring for the stainless steel Fisher, maybe you should. I do know like that stainless steel Fisher one isn't that much more money. It's probably just a little bit more. But I think the downside to the Fisher would be the weight, the heavy weight. And then the boss spreaders too. I hear a lot of good stuff about the boss spreaders. The Snow X spreaders are so good. But for me, for being a guy that's leaving salt in his spreader, even though I'm not supposed to, for a guy that's doing all this stuff, you know, drilling holes in it, whatever, screwing lights all over the place, whatever, it's a good enough spreader. It really is. You know, it really is. So anyway, this is DS Trucks. My name is Sean. See you guys in the next video. Subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content. Over and out. See you guys later. Bye.